The collapse of Afghanistan accelerates. Britney Spears one step closer to freedom. And Love Hate 8 Counterpoint edition. Friday Need to Know. Let's go. Good morning. This is Cheddar's Need2Know podcast for Friday, August 13th. I am Jill Wagner here with Carlo Versano. Carlo, I am not a fan of Friday the 13th.
Oh my God, I didn't even realize that.
Lay low and not really leave the house, to tell you the truth.
I didn't know you were that superstitious, Jill, and I actually didn't realize it was Friday the 13th. Well, it is Friday, and you know what that means? That means, of course, we're doing our YouTube live chat. That's this morning at 9 a.m. Eastern time. You can join us, youtube.com/cheddar now, and I will also tweet out the permalink to the actual instant premiere of this podcast as soon as I get it. So it's also Friday, which means it's the weekend, which means, Jill, White Lotus. The season finale.
I watched 3 episodes, Carlo.
You did?
And I'm obsessed. I love it. I'm laughing out loud. It's great.
I'm telling you. I knew you would be. I'm so happy to hear that. So yes, for everybody out there, you have a little prescription from Dr. Carlo this weekend. It's going to be hot out there. Stay inside. Get your drug of choice, whatever that is, margarita, maybe a little something stronger, whatever it takes. Order some food in and binge the White Lotus. I guarantee you will enjoy it.
Considering this family is basically in quarantine, that sounds wonderful. All right, Carlo, let's start in Afghanistan. A whole lot of movement since we talked about Afghanistan yesterday. The Pentagon is now going to be deploying 3,000 additional troops to secure the withdrawal of the U.S. Embassy staff in Kabul as the security situation in that country rapidly deteriorates, basically one step short of a full evacuation. Britain also sending in troops to help UK nationals leave their embassy. The Taliban continues an offensive blitz that is shocking officials in terms of its speed and its efficiency. American negotiators have reportedly asked the militant group not to attack the embassy if and when it tries to take Kabul. What do them a favor? Do us a solid. Don't attack the embassy. Is that the conversation?
Oh my God, that's God. You have to cry. You have to laugh, or else you'd cry, I guess. U.S. News and World Report reporting this morning that China is prepared to recognize the Taliban as the legitimate government of Afghanistan if and when Kabul falls. That would be a big deal. Taliban fighters also just overrunning 2 more critical cities in the last 24 hours, including the cultural hub of Kandahar. Some intelligence officials now worry Kabul could fall just in time for the 20th anniversary of 9/11, Jill, as you mentioned yesterday, and talk about some bad optics that would be for this White House.
Okay, so I wanted to provide a little bit of context here. I was watching NBC Nightly News. Lester Holt interviewed retired Admiral James DeFreedy, and I thought he had some great insight. So Lester Holt asked him why the Afghan army is failing to stop the advance of the Taliban. Right? Like, that's the question that we've been wondering, because we have basically spent the last 20 years trying to train them. Exactly. His answer, he says, it is heartbreaking, not just the training, but the vast amount of equipment and endless intelligence provided. We gave them everything that they needed, but we couldn't give them leadership and will. And those are the determinant factors on any battlefield. I think that says it all, right? I mean, you can't teach somebody that. If they don't really want to do it, then they're not going to, I guess. Right. And to your point yesterday that maybe the Taliban would get its act together and not be quite as brutal if it wants to be taken seriously as the legitimate Afghan government, the retired admiral says, nope, Taliban 2.0, very similar to Taliban 1.0. They are massacring villages, raping women, destroying areas. It's basically the same group in terms of their tactics that existed 20 years ago. And just in terms of what's happening on the ground now, there is this real concern that we're going to have this kind of fall of Saigon moment where we're going to have images of Americans having to be airlifted off of the roof of the embassy in that country. That does not look good. Those are images that sort of stay with you. But the question is also what happens to the Afghans who are left, right? The Americans will likely, anyone left there will get out and be just fine in terms of the Americans. But what about the Afghans? And it's a point you've been making in terms of the Afghans who helped in terms of the translators. There was this profile on NBC of a woman who started a yoga studio in Kabul, which would have been really unthinkable a few years ago. Like, what becomes of that? There are female journalists who never could have been female journalists. That profession didn't exist before 20 years ago, who are now basically in hiding, trying to find some type of route out of the country, or at least the city where they are.
Yeah.
So it's a dire situation. I mean, this is a terrible situation.
Yeah, and a situation with no good options. Also, and the other question, in terms of at least U.S. interests, is what happens with Al Qaeda, right? I mean, Al Qaeda has been basically decimated. That's been the one sort of success of this whole adventure, right? They're Al Qaeda more or less not a threat anymore. Do they reconstitute under the Taliban once the Taliban is back in control?
Right. Or have terror, or is it ISIS now in Syria? Or, I mean, like, where is our biggest threat, right? The reason we were there is because the Taliban was basically harboring Al Qaeda, which attacked us on 9/11. Is that still a threat, or is this just a domestic problem, in terms of Afghanistan? I've seen zero good intelligence on that. I don't know if you have.
No, I haven't. I think that, I mean, one thing we have now that we didn't have back then is a very robust drone program that's very controversial, but is also potentially a way for us to sort of keep, assuming that we can still get good intelligence out of that country, which is a big if the Afghan government collapses. But that could be the thing that sort of keeps the U.S. at sort of like arm's length involvement, right? If we continue a drone strike campaign against the Taliban, or at least against Al Qaeda, if it starts to reconstitute.
All right, let's talk about what's happening here in the U.S. in terms of COVID. I just want to quickly mention, if you're wondering why I only have one hair roller, if you're watching this on YouTube, I left all of my hair rollers at the office because I thought I'd be back the next day. And I guess if there's one lesson of COVID, it's like
bring everything with you.
Nothing's guaranteed. You may never be back in the office. Like, so, because we could have had a case in the office and then have all had to work from home. So I knew better, but I did it anyway. And so now
I think you look good. I like the look. I like the sort of like, I don't really, pompadour look.
Yes. It's very something about Mary.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, San Francisco is adopting the strictest vaccine mandate yet, requiring proof of vaccination for most indoor venues, including restaurants, bars, and gyms. Notable here is there is no option to show a negative test. It's fully vaccinated or bust if you want to eat, drink, or do pretty much anything indoors in San Francisco. Meanwhile, more than 90% of U.S. counties now meet the CDC's guidelines for indoor masking, with high or substantial COVID transmission. Some promising news: the pace of vaccinations is ramping up in some of the southern states, seeing the worst spread, with the number of shots given in Louisiana, Alabama, and Mississippi quadrupling over the last month. Well, congratulations, those states, for eventually realizing that, yes, this pandemic is quite real.
Yes. Over at the Supreme Court, this is notable to mention here, Amy Coney Barrett denying an emergency petition from some students at Indiana University who asked the Supreme Court to overturn its vaccine mandate. ACB saying, nope. If you're wondering why it was just her, she's the justice in charge of fielding these sorts of emergency petitions from that region of the country. That's all there is to it. But that's the reason why this is important. That's going to give some cover to, I think, a lot more colleges to require proof of vaccination. And the time is running out here. I mean, my recollection is that next week is, I think, the week when freshmen start showing up on campus at a lot of schools in this country.
Also want to point out that there's this school district in South Carolina in Kershaw County. 116 students and 20 staff members have tested positive in the first week of school. That's 5% of the entire student body, which is now currently in quarantine, which could give a sense of what this fall could look like for kids, especially in these under-vaccinated districts.
Oh, God, yeah, I saw that yesterday. Those are not good numbers for the first week back. You were right, I think, yesterday in what you said about this really just being an example of us as adults really failing our children once again, which has been one of these through lines, I think, since COVID started. So the South Carolina thing notwithstanding, I am, or at least I was, starting to feel like a tinge of optimism again yesterday. I mean, look, how many times have I said that? Have you said that? Have we danced this dance? I know how this goes. But I think that this wave is going to start to burn itself out. I think that by the time fall rolls around, we maybe are done with this. At least done with the pandemic part of it, if not officially, that at least in practice. I just think that there's so many people who are getting immunity now, either from the vaccines or natural immunity, just from getting this virus, that I think there's just not going to be enough people to infect one of these days. And I think that's going to happen sooner than we think. By the way, this is based on nothing but a gut feeling, right?
Sorry.
I don't have any. I don't have any. Sorry.
Just my camera.
I don't have any.
Carlo,
it's a gut feeling, I hope.
I don't know what you're drinking out on the East End right now, but give me some, because I'm
Yes.
I feel your optimism. I don't share it. The reason is that I think the virus has changed so much. It was that SARS-CoV-2 originally. Yeah. It feels like anyone who was infected with that last year, March, April, May, sorry, I mean, those antibodies probably don't exist anymore. And this virus is just so much different that it's going to impact you. And again, if you look at Israel, their hospitals are starting to fill up again. And look, they had the Pfizer, they basically did the Pfizer rollout quite effectively. They're now giving out third shots, boosters to people 60 and older. There are some reports that if you had the Moderna vaccine, that might withstand the Delta variant a little bit better. But I don't know. I mean, I am hearing more and more people, especially kids, who are either in quarantine or who have gotten COVID. I spoke to the woman who runs my daughter's school. She does a call every week. She told me 30 schools on it said that there were cases of kids who had COVID. I told my daughter's on quarantine right now. By the way, thank you so much for everybody who wrote in and wished me well and wished my daughter well. I cannot tell you how appreciative I am of your concern. So really, thank you so much for that. But I don't know. It feels to me better for the adults right now. Like I'm not particularly that nervous about getting COVID myself. But for the kids, this feels like a different pandemic than it felt last year. The kids just had this seeming like not immune to it, but you just weren't really hearing about kids getting it and kids getting really sick. But now I know a kid, third hand, who had to go to a young kid, healthy, who ended up in the emergency room. He's fine, but he ended up in the emergency room with COVID. So it's hitting kids now. And I don't know if maybe that is going to be the emotional thing that gets adults to say, okay, I will get the vaccine, or just to do something. But okay, a couple things I wanted to note on that before I could just go on like a crazy tangent. Which I can, but I think my husband appreciates this podcast because it spares him my diatribes on COVID.
I know exactly what you mean. Becky's the same way.
Okay, so Anthony Fauci was asked by also Lester Holt about just how this ends if you look historically at other pandemics that we've had. And he said, if you look back at the history of devastating illness, smallpox, measles, polio, the solution is universal vaccination. And if during those pandemics we had an attitude of people not wanting to get vaccinated, those diseases likely would not be eliminated right now. One recommendation out there, if anybody is a parent right now and has kids that are going to go back to school, or they're already back at school and they're just wondering what to do and they're looking for information, Andy Slavitt's podcast, it's called In the Bubble with Andy Slavitt, Our Shot. It's called Toolkit Kids, School, and Delta, where he gets two experts on. They answer questions from parents. I found it to be really, really informative. And there are no great answers, but at least you'll have the information. So I highly recommend it.
Very cool. Thank you for that.
Okay, a heads up for Floridians. Tropical storm warnings have been now issued for the Florida Keys ahead of Fred's arrival. The system is still a tropical depression, but could strengthen once it moves over Cuba later today or tomorrow. The latest models still have Fred skirting up the western coast of Florida before making landfall along the Panhandle early Monday. The good news is that there's probably not enough time in those warm waters for Fred to become a hurricane at this point.
Yeah, it's going to be a rain event, it looks like, in the southeast this weekend and through the early week. Miami to Atlanta, all looking at several inches of rain over the next few days. So obviously, be careful on the roads and all that. If you're out there, all the more reason to just stay inside, watch The White Lotus. I feel like I'm promoting the show as
Are
though I
they
have some
paying you?
No, they're not. Somebody should be.
And Scott Galloway, Andy Slavitt, The White Lotus. There's a few shows and people that I think could really pay us here.
Absolutely.
The Census Bureau has released a trove of data from the 2020 headcount showing that the country's white population declined for the first time. The last batch of data back in April showed that overall population growth declined in the 2010s for the first time since the Depression. And it gives a more granular view on the changing demographics of the U.S., showing that cities and suburbs are getting more diverse while rural areas remain largely white. The data is key for states to start the process of redrawing their voting maps. I just want to make clear the white population, it's not like the percentage declined, like the actual number of white people in this country declined.
Exactly. Yeah. Good point there. A couple takeaways from this, which happened yesterday. This is a multiracial country, and it is becoming more so every year. In the 2010 census, the people who checked the box for more than one race numbered 9 million. In the 2020 census, 34 million. That's a 300% increase. Remarkable. And it's probably a little bit of an overstatement because I think a lot of people who may have considered themselves one race in 2010 now consider themselves, at least in these questionnaires, to be of more than one race, at least just based on social trends. Also, this was really sort of more evidence of just the white rural versus diverse urban and suburban divide. That's nothing new. It's what a lot of people pointed to as kind of the root of the Trump phenomenon back in 2016, though I personally think that had a lot more to do with class than it did with race. Also, little tidbit here, little trivia for you. The fastest growing metro area in the United States, the Villages, Florida. That's that big retirement community that they have outside of Orlando. Their population grew 40% over the last decade, which is, of course, just indicative of our aging baby boomer population, our parents.
That's so fascinating. I really didn't think you were going to say that. I thought you were going to say somewhere in Texas, actually, because that Austin and Dallas and the big cities
that's what I would have guessed.
Saw a lot of growth. What did you say?
No, that's just what I would have guessed, too. I was surprised to see that.
A big development in the Britney Spears saga. Britney Spears' father has agreed to step down from her conservatorship, according to legal documents filed in L.A. Jamie Spears' attorney says he is pledging to take part in an orderly transition, though it does not note when that would be. Britney's new lawyer says he intends to depose Spears as part of an investigation into his conduct as head of the $60 million conservatorship over the last 13 years.
A big win here, big win for Britney, and of course for her new attorney who made this happen. But I think the question here is when? When does the elder, Mr. Spears, actually resign? Because he didn't really, in these documents, give a good picture of when he's out. He's just sort of saying like, okay, I realize the time has come for me to leave. So we shall see.
Finally, Kanye West may drop his new album this weekend. He may not. No one knows. What we do know is that Donda or no Donda, Kanye's brand is still going quite strong. The rapper has reportedly already made $7 million off the official merch for his 2 listening parties, the second of which was Apple Music's most watched live stream ever. His catalog is also seeing a 37% spike in streams in anticipation of Donda. So maybe delaying this album is some kind of genius marketing strategy on Kanye's part, whether intentional or not. I mean, I don't know.
Yes, it could be, Jill. One thing Yeezy is not good at building buzz for, that would be the COVID vaccines. According to Billboard magazine, just 4 of the 40,000 people who went to last week's listening party in Atlanta took advantage of the on-site vaccination pop-up. That's according, again, to Billboard. And that's actually part of a trend. We saw similarly poor numbers at a recent Garth Brooks concert where they had a vaccine pop-up on site. It just shows you it's not really access anymore. That's the problem, right? Everyone knows that these vaccines are available and they're free and you can get them basically wherever you want. It's that people who haven't gotten them don't want them. And the only reason they're going to get them is if they're forced to at this point.
All right, let's do a little love, hate, hate. One thing that we love, getting to scan a QR code to see the menu. It certainly beats having to touch some dirty paper menu. And it's also this excuse to look down at your phone, or like you could pretend you're looking at the menu when you're really, checking your text messages or doing some other stuff that is a little taboo if you're sitting with real people.
Right. Okay. Well, we promised you a point counterpoint, and here is your point counterpoint here. One thing that we hate, having to scan a freaking QR code to see the menu. This is one of these pandemic inventions that appears to be staying permanent from what I can tell, and I absolutely hate it. I think, first of all, I think it's borderline discriminatory. It's an insult to our human dignity wrapped in this sort of like 2020 era hygiene theater that you and I talked about so much last year, Jill. When I go out to eat, I want the full tactical experience, right? I want to feel the menu. I want to look at it. I want to touch everything. I want to smell and eat. Not to mention, also, just on a serious note, the New York Times reported recently that these QR codes are just a privacy nightmare, and that there's a lot of tracking going on behind the scenes there. So there's our point counterpoint. I'm curious what people think.
Discriminatory because there's people who may not have smartphones.
Yeah, like my mother, for instance, she wouldn't be able to basically do this because she doesn't have a smartphone.
But I'm sure they have backup paper menus if you want them.
Yeah, I guess.
It's funny.
Well,
I was totally anti the QR code. I didn't know how it worked. I was like, anytime I went somewhere that there was a QR code, it bothered me. And then I actually just did it. And because I used to just do it look on my husband's phone. And then I did it myself. And I'm like, okay, it's so easy. It's like, even I could do it, who's technically not pretty savvy.
Maybe
and
it's
like
the
I
future.
said, I like that you could kind of zoom in. I don't know. I'm into it. But if you want that dirty menu, you should get that dirty menu, Carlo.
Okay, and finally, I believe I have the 8 this week. One thing that we ate, grocery store brand ice cream sandwiches. You know what I'm talking about, just the very basic vanilla ice cream, 2 sticky chocolate wafers, nothing fancy. It's always satisfying. It's a great sort of summer snack. Whole Foods and Stop and Shop both have excellent grocery store branded ice cream sandwiches. Highly recommend. I also had some excellent watermelon last night.
I like that one. All right, Carlo, that is what you need to know for Friday, August 13th. Be careful out there, everybody.
Be careful and have a good weekend, guys.